Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 9th Annual GROW Jamestown Garden Fair. We're so excited that you guys are able to join us this morning. This is the first time that we've ever done this event virtually, which has been a very unique and exciting challenge for us. Last year, we missed all of you, our wonderful community members, vendors, and workshop presenters who join us for this amazing event. In 2019, 2,500 of you came through the doors of the Jamestown Northwest Ice Arena to join us for our event, and it was our most successful in the 9 years that we've hosted this event. For those of you who are unaware of the changes to the GROW Jamestown event, besides the fact that it's now virtual for this year, is that it is now under the home of the Jamestown Public Market and our associated programs. So the Jamestown Public Market's mission is to build our city's food system, and we do that in a variety of ways. The first being educational opportunities like the GROW Fair, where we are able to bring you speakers and experts in their field to share their knowledge on gardening, growing, and the food system at large. Obviously, gardening, specifically gardening vegetables, herbs, fruits, is part of the food system. And so when we had the opportunity this year to take over the management of the GROW Jamestown Garden Fair from the Jamestown Renaissance Corporation, we were just absolutely thrilled. I have been managing this event as the market director since 2019. And so we are just so excited that this event is now officially a part of the Jamestown Public Market programming. Those of you who may be aware of the program and the event in the past know that we have some amazing community partners beyond just the workshop presenters and the vendors that participate. So we would like to highlight those really quickly before we get started with our first presenters today. We would like to thank our returning presenting sponsor, Mike's Nursery, located in Lakewood, New York. They are your premier nursery and growing center. We know that many of you look forward to their free tomato seedlings that they offer at the GROW Fair every year. Unfortunately, we can't give you a virtual tomato as much as we would really love to, but instead, those of you who registered for the event received in the programming a coupon discount offer so that you can get some in-store offers right at Mike's Nursery. So you can print that coupon or bring it up on your phone and go into Mike's Nursery during this season and get some wonderful things for your garden. They have a variety of seedlings. They have all of your fertilizer needs, soil, and Mike is extremely knowledgeable, as many of you know. So please go visit them, thank them. We would also like to thank the Resource Center for being a returning sponsor. They are an extreme, amazing supporter of this program year after year. And we are very excited because today, one lucky participant will receive one of their beautiful gardening accessories that many of you may know their group home and program participants create out of bowling balls, used bowling balls. They decorate them, paint them, design them. And so we'll be talking about that a little later in the event. Finally, we'd also like to thank Novel Destination Used Book Emporium for their amazing support for this event and many of our other programs with the Jamestown Public Market. And we'd also like to thank the Chautauqua County Watershed Conservancy for their support of this event and their continuing support of our ecological system right here in Chautauqua County. So we have an amazing day of some really exciting presenters. You guys are going to learn a lot. We're going to cover a wide range of gardening, growing, and food systems topics. And we also have some exciting surprises for you along the way. So thank you for joining us once again. And I'm going to turn it over to our two first speakers for this morning. And we're super excited to have them join us today. So we have with us today Jeanette Koncikowski. Am I saying that correctly, Jeanette? Wonderful. Yes. Great. And Jeanette and Marianne Kedron are here today from Grassroots Gardens of Western New York. And I will turn it over to you, Jeanette, to introduce yourself. And Jeanette and Marianne are going to be presenting on community revitalization through community gardens. And we're so excited to learn all that they have to offer us today. So thank you again for joining us, Jeanette and Marianne.
Sure. Thank you all so much for having us. We're happy to be here. We're sorry we couldn't join you in person in Jamestown. I hope to be at future fairs. So I'm Jeanette Koncikowski. I'm the Executive Director of Grassroots Gardens of Western New York. We are home to the community gardens in the city of Buffalo and the city of Niagara Falls. This season we have 110. We just picked up 2 more yesterday, 110 community gardens with us in network. And one of those, actually a few of those, are under the stewardship and care of the Black Rock Riverside Alliance and my friend Marianne Kedron, who's here today too. And so Marianne's actually going to kick it off by talking about their gardens in the Black Rock Riverside neighborhood. And I'll let her introduce herself, and then I'll be back to tell you more about Grassroots Gardens after her presentation.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I'm so excited to be here. If any of you think I look a little bit familiar, it's because I spent a lot of time down in the Southern Tier when I was a healthcare administrator. So don't think that your eyes are playing tricks with you. It could be me. So right now I am working with the Black Rock Riverside Alliance, a not-for-profit that actually represents the northern portion of the city of Buffalo. And Jeanette is going to be my right-hand man here, and she's going to run my PowerPoint presentation. So bear with us if things get a little wonky, because this is the first time we're doing it this way. So
I just actually asked, I asked them if they could share the screen. I'm not able to yet.
Yeah.
Don't mind letting it.
We will work it out. We've been doing virtual
Here we go.
For about a year, so we're getting better at it as we go. So
can everybody see that? All right, Marianne, I'm gonna just take myself off screen. Just tell me next when you want to go forward, and I'll keep moving you forward.
So good morning, everybody, from Grassroots Gardens and the Black Rock Riverside Alliance and Community Gardens. This presentation is really all about how does your garden grow and what is going on within the gardens themselves. Jeanette, next. Let's see if we can. It's about, first and foremost, these gardens are about bringing food to the community. We are a food desert. We do not have a lot of resources within our community, even though we live in a very, very densely populated urban setting. So first and foremost, it's community. Whoa, the things are going crazy.
Sorry about that, Marianne. We're getting there. It wouldn't be a Zoom presentation if it didn't, the technology didn't work. All right, I think we're good now.
Yeah. So we grow food in our community, but go back one, please. Thank you. We grow fruits and vegetables, but most of all, these community gardens represent our mechanisms for building community. And we have 2 in one neighborhood and another, just about 1 or 2 in another neighborhood. And they have really been functional for us for about 10 years. Next. We grow vegetables in each of our gardens with the kinds of food going into the community. I want to stress, this is a really strong point. These are not my gardens. These are my community's gardens. So we grow things that the community really wants us to grow or asks us to grow. And they tell us that through different mechanisms. Sometimes it's very obvious because they pick everything that we plant. And sometimes it's a matter of discussing information with the gardeners or the people who come into the garden. We grow a tremendous number of peppers, for example, and a tremendous number of varieties of peppers because that's what the people in our community want. So I just caution that whenever somebody does these things, make sure that you're doing what the community wants and needs rather than what you think the community wants and needs. Next. These are some of our beds. These are 2 different community gardens. They're all raised beds. Thank you so much to Grassroots Gardens, who is a steward and a partner and helps us through every step of these establishments of these gardens. And as we need things, we work together to, for example, reestablish the soils, put some fertilizer in, put new composting in. It really is a partnership that has worked really, really well for us over 10 years. Next. Fruits are a favorite. We grow fruit trees and berry bushes. These are city lots, so there's lots of stuff going on within a small space. We have apples, pears, cherries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries are the favorites. Every year they are the first things to go, and we have really gotten a group of people now who understand the dynamics of the gardens and understand the timing of the gardens. So it's not very long before that stuff disappears. But the community and the birds compete very heavily for these. Next. Okay, some more pictures of our gardens. We do put a lot of flowers as much as we can within the gardens. We're very conscious of the aesthetics of the gardens because they are a little oasis within our communities. So you don't be surprised if you see sunflowers or other perennials in the gardens, as well as fruits and vegetables. Next. Our gardens are used year-round as a place of community pride. I think this is a really, really important piece of this. These gardens are protected by our community, and they are also, there's a certain expectation that things are going to be happening in these gardens. On the left side of my screen anyway, there are tulips in the garden because in the spring we make sure that our gardens come alive as soon as we can. So there are tulips and there might be some daffodils in there, and people watch the tulips grow and they watch the daffodils, and I get reports about, whether I've put the right kind of tulips in or not into the gardens. But they're really the first sign of the spring and the first sign of hope for this community to have a good summer and a good season. On the other side, you see the flags. We will put our flags up. We will take them down. We'll have them up for Memorial Day. We'll have them up for 4th of July. And there's a billboard there where we put notes saying, welcome to the garden, happy 4th of July. Just again, the celebration of community as a part of the gardens as a part of the community. Next. Our gardens build community. You cannot believe the number of people who will walk into those gardens, people who will not talk to each other on the street, will come in and talk to each other in the gardens. People who do not necessarily speak English will come in and try to communicate in the gardens. It usually takes me at least 2 to 3 times as long to do things in our community gardens as they do in my own home gardens, because I am constantly speaking to community members, which is pretty much the whole point of having those gardens. Next. We find that people share time and spaces that would not interact otherwise. These spaces are opportunities to set good examples. There are opportunities to work with kids who may not have ever touched the soil before. I know that's hard to believe in some instances, but some kids just don't have the opportunity to dig in the dirt. And you hand them a shovel and you tell them to go do something, and they really, really enjoy it. They work together. We find bugs together. We find all kinds of berries and fruits together. It's a really enriching space for myself as well as I think for the kids. Next. We've used a lot of creative mechanisms to keep people engaged in our gardens. This happens to have come from a grant. They become community teaching spaces for us in a variety of ways. This in particular is a way for people to learn historic facts about our community. Those little doors open up and they're just stuck in the ground. There's no big deal. It's just a piece of plywood that's been painted. But if you open the doors up, you learn a fun fact about the community. And it's a really just different way to introduce something that could be really, really boring into the environment. Next. These are my favorite parts of the garden in terms of the non-food producing portions of it. We have little free library spaces in each of our gardens. They are registered little free libraries. They have been there for a long, long time. They were introduced to us and actually created for us by a Boy Scout troop. This was an Eagle project for one of the Boy Scouts. Who took on the responsibility of customizing these libraries for each of the gardens, which means that they needed to learn a little bit about the history of the neighborhood in order to make it relevant. And these are pretty active spaces for us. Next. Yeah, and it also is an opportunity, it's a really unique opportunity to engage different kinds of people from the community in the gardens. Not everybody loves to garden. I know that's shocking. For me, I spend as much time as possible in the dirt, but not everybody likes to garden, and nor does everybody know how to garden. So with the little free libraries, we find people stepping up who say, you know, yes, I will come in and I will manage the books for you, and I will come in and make sure that the libraries are stocked, and I will just come in and, you know, maintain them as a project or as a volunteer effort. It's really interesting because those people are typically not gardeners, and they're very different from the people you would typically see in the gardens. But it's a wonderful way to interact with a completely different group of people. Next. It also is an opportunity for businesses to get involved in the community gardens, and again, a different way. We have a lot of businesses who give us gardening supplies and will work with us in the gardens. But again, this is a different opportunity. This is a business that stepped up and said, oh, we absolutely will do a book drive for you. And we will, you know, get the books from, you know, this is something we would want to do for the community. So they went out and they got books for kids, and we got boxes and boxes and boxes of books. And it was a really nice opportunity because, again, they took great pride in this. We took great, you know, we were thrilled to get the books, and it was a really, really wonderful interaction. It was a good thing. We got a lot of press for it. This was actually a photo op. It was just another good way to take pride in your community and to reach out to people who may not have ever stepped into these gardens. Next. Each library is decorated to reflect the garden. I think I've said this already, but the contents of the books are pretty much the same. Our mission is, you know, children's reading, so we do a lot with children's books. We do allow the community to put books in there. We have made some very policy-oriented decisions not to allow controversial books, however you want to describe those. We try to stay away from heavily religious books. You know, that's as opposed to something that's an easy read, an uplifting book. So we do monitor these. I've never really found anything untoward in them. I know somebody might say, oh, it's just going to be a drug spot or something. We've never found that to be the case. They tend to be respected well. And we typically have difficulty because people put too many books in them. So we monitor them to keep them usable more than anything else at this point. And again, we always want to have children's books in them and available to the community. Next. Sometimes our gardens are just quiet spaces. And sometimes that's the most important thing we can give to our community. Having somebody be able to read a book, having somebody just to have a quiet time and just, you know, have a cup of coffee in our gardens. We have a lot of people who just stop by and sit. People will come by for lunch. I think it's really important that the gardens reflect what the community needs. And I know sometimes people get very judgmental. We've been through this for a long time. And people are like, well, that's not what they're for. Well, they're for whatever the community needs. So our commitment is to raise food, which we do. We also leave just a little bit of space so that people could sit down and read a book. They could have lunch. And they can use it as often as they can because, again, we don't have a lot of community space within our community right now. Next. Oh, we use it as education. I'm glad I put this slide in. We certainly use it for education. We love to teach gardeners, you know, more about gardening. We love to teach novices about gardening. We will do tours. Our gardens are always part of our tour of gardens, which we do annually. Again, we bring people into the community and show them our gardens who would never step foot in our gardens otherwise. It's another opportunity to interact and understand what our community is. It's a fun thing. It's really a lot of fun to do these and introduce people and take them on tour, and people usually have a really good time. I enjoy doing these. Next. They've also become community art spaces for us. This is something that was totally unexpected, and we had an opportunity through a grant to allow people to come in and help design poetry, do some book, design some books, and become a community art space for a summer. Next. Yeah, this is really kind of wild. We did art, we did poetry, we did book creation. We had adults, as many adults participating as kids. You think that this would be a children's activity? We had a lot of adults who were really excited about this, who had never really done poetry. And the way they introduced it was a very hands-on mechanism for doing it, and having someone stand up and actually read a poem they created in the middle of what I would consider a very safe environment was really pretty uplifting. It was amazing. The children loved it. The adults loved it. Again, it was a really, really good thing. And these only lasted maybe 45 minutes over the course of maybe 6 weeks or something like that. If you wanted to come, you came. If you didn't, you didn't. It was pretty popular at the end of it. Next. I like this slide, and I put this slide in purposely. The art program I just discussed allowed for a really unique multi-generational and multi-ethnic interaction in this particular garden. One of the children there has been in our garden since he was about 3 years old. He's now 13. So Sam thinks he owns all of our gardens, and will tell anybody who thinks he doesn't otherwise. But he's a very strong advocate for our gardens. And the child next to him is Khalid, and he is a Syrian refugee who spoke very little English at the beginning of the year. And his English improved incredibly by the end of the year, mostly because he hung out with Sam, but also because he kind of participated in this whole poetry art project. And the kids, both of these children kind of enjoyed it. And, these are teen boys, so it was a little wonky at first, but they really, really came back multiple times. The woman in the picture lives in the neighborhood, and her name is Bertie, and she is, I believe, Greek. So the three of them have very different backgrounds. They ended up winning a kind of award for this art program, and this is them in an award environment. It is a dinner. They were so overwhelmed and so proud of themselves that we couldn't take enough pictures of them. And it was such a simple act and a simple award. And I think it meant so much to these three, the adult as well as the kids, that again, little things mean a lot to people, I guess is my point. Next. Creative play. Sidewalks are also spaces that we use. We have a little bee hopscotch. We were teaching kids about bees and butterflies, so we wanted to reflect that in a little bit of creative play. The little white, the fish and the blue there is kind of our little interpretation of the Niagara River, which runs in our, next to our neighborhood, and wanted kids to recognize that there's different kind of fishes and different color fishes and just count the fish kind of thing. So, we try to use the spaces as much as we can. Next. Places for volunteers to learn about your community. This is a really good way to get people to come in and interact. As I said, people who would not normally come into the space and are willing to do great things. This is a group of students who came in and created a table and chairs for us that is now in the gardens, and you'll see it later on in the slide where people are having lunch by it. It's also a checkerboard. It was a great activity. Again, volunteer spaces, more people coming in. This is one of the banks who comes in. They love to do work. They're great for about 3 or 4 hours, and then you may or may never see them again, but that's okay. Next. Again, another group. This is, I think, one of the colleges. We do a lot of work with the colleges. They're really good supporters of the gardens. Next. This is, we were talking about the community space. This is somebody just deciding that they're going to come in and sit and share a space. This is a Burmese family. Sorry, I think it's, yeah, Burmese, who came in and decided to have lunch one day. Perfect use for our space. Next. Oh, a site for our really, really free markets. We run a free market where we give things away that people will bring things that they want to give away, and people will come and take things. No exchange of money, totally free. They are very popular in our community. We have a relatively low socioeconomic status, so people need things, and we have people who want to give things away. Very popular use of our spaces. Next. Oh, this is the last of our little endeavors. This was another one of our art projects. This is Brocky the Pig. He's our garden mascot. He served, as I said, more purposes than I can describe. His hat is from a neighbor, and I think this is somewhat significant. He's in one of our gardens, and the neighbor absolutely insisted that it was football season, and he wasn't dressed appropriately, so he came and brought him one of his hats, which stayed on his head for quite a while during the season. Next. Yeah, he's an all-around fun pig. You can see. We have hashtag Brocky, so you can post a picture of him in our garden. That was one of my favorite pictures because the puppy was so cute. And the kids, you can see, can jump on him, hopefully not break him, but sit there and get pictures. It's just, again, what a fun use of a garden. What a great picture to post. And the kids feel engaged in the gardens at a very early age, as you can see. Next. Oh, yes. He also became a very big advocate for COVID mask wearing during the pandemic. So Brocky does have the appropriate mask, and you'll notice he is wearing it appropriately over his mouth and his nose. So we've, used him for that as well. So we will use things as much as we can in as many ways as we can in our gardens. Next. This is our team. It's not a very big team. These are our workers, and we have a bunch of volunteers who work in the gardens. So we have team leaders. We do deliver probably between 500 and 700 pounds of food a year in our gardens, and we do all these other things as well. So that's us. I'm happy to take questions as soon as Jeanette's done. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. So I'm going to just take a moment to switch over, and we're going to come back and make sure we have time for questions at the end of this. Linnea, can I just check in? What is our total time before we need to stop and allow 10 to 15 minutes for questions?
Absolutely. So we have about a half hour left in the total presentation. And so I will remind participants as well, you can use either the Q&A function at the bottom or the chat to send your questions. And I do see we have a question now, but we will wait till that portion to address them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, Marianne really looked at kind of what happens inside the community gardens, and I want to talk about how the community gardens start and how they grow those larger community strategies. So when people think of a community garden, they probably think of spaces like Marianne has, but many of our community gardens start off looking like this lot here. This is on Buffalo's west side. It becomes our Cottage District Community Garden. And for a while, people would refer to this as the before picture. But to me, this is day one. This is literally day one of the community garden. This is the neighbors cleaning up this lot that had been an eyesore in the neighborhood for, I believe, about 10 years before the lot club found the lot on Craigslist up for purchase. And they purchased it from an absentee landlord. And within 5 years, it was completely transformed into the Cottage District Community Garden. This is one of our older gardens in the network. It actually came into the Grassroots Gardens Land Trust in 2017, and there is no chance it will ever go back to looking the way it did before, because now it is a permanent part of the neighborhood, conserved as a community garden. So I'll share with you a bit about the Grassroots Gardens model. We, as Marianne said, are composed of member gardens, and none of these are our individual gardens. These are all community-wide efforts. And so our mission at Grassroots is to share knowledge, resources, and power to grow healthy food, heal systemic harm, and strengthen neighborhood connections through community gardens. This is actually the last picture we took at our new community garden at Broadway Street next to our headquarters in September 2019, right before we broke for the season, not knowing we would not be together again in person. And so this was the folks that were left at the end of the night. We had about 80 people come to our harvest celebration that evening. And it's just a great group of people from all over Buffalo that in Niagara Falls now that are growing gardens with us. So our model is a little bit different than some other community garden networks you may see in other parts of the country. We really see ourselves as seeding 5 key ingredients. We connect people to land. About 85% of our gardens are on previously vacant city lots. So we act as a master leaseholder with the City of Buffalo and the City of Niagara Falls. What happens when a community wants a garden is we don't go into a neighborhood and say, hey, you have a lot of vacant spaces, you should create a community garden here. The community has to have the desire and wants to do the work of building that garden together. And so we're just there to facilitate that connection to the land. So when a community identifies that they would like a garden, they will call Grassroots or they'll call the City of Buffalo, who will then refer them to me. And we'll say, do you have a lot in mind? Is there someone somewhere in your neighborhood you're thinking of? We'll see if it's a vacant lot. Buffalo has over 8,000 vacant lots because of our long history of systemic disinvestment in some neighborhoods. And while there has now been, gentrification happening in other neighborhoods with this kind of quote unquote renaissance in Buffalo, there's still a lot of vacant lots. And so now we're seeing parts of the city where there's too much land vacant and empty and blighted, and other parts where it's very hard to continue to get access to space. So that's one of the issues that we tackle, is connecting people to land. We also underwrite the cost of the insurance. The community gardeners like Marianne and company have to pay for that insurance to be able to garden. We believe that food is a human right and all people should be able to grow food for free. And so we don't want gardening and the cost that often comes with it to be an impediment to being able to grow your own food and be self-sufficient. So we also provide the materials to get gardening. We make a minimum of a 2-year financial contribution to all of our gardens so that they can have access to the lumber, the soil, the tools, the seeds, the seedlings, anything they need to get started. We also then provide education. We have a master gardener on staff. We also have a youth garden educator on staff, and they will work with our gardeners to teach them whatever they need to know how to grow, whether that's just how to plant seeds, how to build a raised bed, how to harvest vegetables. We offer free education all year that is funded by our partner at the United Way. So we can either come on site into a community garden and do that with the community, or people can join us this year and last year because of the pandemic. We're hosting lots of free seminars on Zoom right now, but we're returning, and I'm excited for that this month, actually next weekend. So next month, we're going to be back doing some in-person, outdoor, socially distant programming on composting, and we're excited to start offering a little bit on site again. So Grassroots is really using kind of 3 key engagement strategies for growing community. And that first one is just a really important one of engaging the public. How do we get people interested in gardening? This is a picture of our school garden at the Universal School in Buffalo. It is one of the few private schools in our network. Our school gardens, we have 30. They're mostly with Buffalo Public Schools, but we do have some private religious schools, such as Universal School. We have a few charter schools with us. A large part of what we do is just introduce people to the idea of gardening. So before they maybe even have their school garden or their community garden, we're doing some neighborhood and school outreach and community-based events. We often find that people kind of really that seed is planted sometimes in just coming into a classroom and doing a simple activity like this here where the kids were planting, their spring seedlings, doing some peas and beans, and it looks like peppers there, and doing a science experiment to get that started. And very quickly, the next season had started growing their garden. We also, as I said, we do that free educational workshops. That's for both adults and youth. It's important to us that we have gardeners across the lifespan. So our youngest gardeners are at the Bennett Park Montessori School. They are our 3- and 4-year-olds in network with us. And we have gardeners in their 90s. And so we're really working across the lifespan to engage all community members in how to garden. One of the other ways that we engage community is through participation in community coalitions. we're at a point after 25 years as an organization where unfortunately I have to start saying no to a lot of groups because we just have so many requests to participate. Between myself and the staff, we're on 12 different community-led coalitions, all related to urban agriculture, climate change, vacant lot reuse. So we're out in community and we're creating those networks. And that's how people hear about us and hear about how to continue growing. And then we also respond to emerging community needs. I'm going to talk in a as a community sense of safety. As a gardening, we don't see ourselves just as a gardening organization. We are a community development organization. Those two things are not separate for us. The community and the gardening is done together, hand in hand. We also empower our gardeners. This is Geraldine Wilson. She was the leader of her block club and told me that for the 6 years she was block club president, she wasn't able to do anything with the vacant lot that sat across the street. And then came to them the idea that they could turn it into a community garden. And she said after 6 months, the garden did more for the neighborhood than they were able to accomplish as a block club over 6 years. One of the things that I want people to know about Geraldine is that she is not only a lead gardener and responsible for organizing her neighborhood, but she's taken her activist skills and really grown that for the entire organization. And so when I met Geraldine, my first week on the job, I came out to her garden to assess the installation of a wheelchair accessible bed and the concrete pad we poured for it because Geraldine sometimes needed a wheelchair to be able to access the garden. And I wasn't sure if it was done right. So I called up Western New York Independent Living. They came out and said, yeah, this is fine, but here's 30 other problems with this garden for someone with disabilities. And so Geraldine and I looked at that garden, saw what needed to improve, but also recognized we had 100 other community gardens that probably had the same issues in them. And so together we wrote a grant and we were funded by the New York State Conservation Program to create our Gardening for All program. And that is a task force that Geraldine now leads as a professional with Grassroots Gardens. She's now a project consultant with us. And so her and other gardeners with disabilities, like our friend Jan here, you can't see his face, he's in the black hat there. Jan is deaf, he's a deaf gardener, and he's leading our first workshop in ASL, American Sign Language, that we did last year. And so one of the things this task force has done has been to empower our gardeners not only to work in changing their gardens, physical and community landscape, but in changing our organization and our community as a whole. So Jan and Geraldine sit on this community-led task force along with other disability rights organizations, and they are holding Grassroots Gardens accountable for change. We have a goal of not only reaching ADA compliance, but in universally designing our gardens for everybody to access. So we respect our gardeners as professionals when they give their time to organizational work, and that includes paying them for that time. The largest part of my job is fundraising so that we have the money needed to put all of this material investment into the garden, but also to be able to recognize people for their time. We also, at a committee level, so Grassroots, people will say to me all the time, what's your vision, Jeanette, for Grassroots? Where are you going the next 5 years? And I always say, my job is to enact the vision of the community. So I'm here to do what the community tells me to do. And how does the community speak to me? They speak to me through our committees. So we have internally, as an organization, we have about 7 different communities right now, committees, and those are all open to the public with the exception of our governance committee. Our board of directors, right now, we're aiming for 50% of our board comprised of our gardeners. That's important to us both in terms of making sure that we're representing our gardeners' needs, but also that we're representing, in very inclusive and diverse ways who our community is that we're serving. And so just since we've opened our committees to the public and really done a lot more nominating within our community gardeners, and people will say to me all the time, well, I couldn't be on a board. That's not for someone like me. And this is exactly who we need on our board. We need the community to tell us how and where we're growing. And so we've been really doing a lot of work to build inclusivity on our board. We also, in addition to offering our gardening education workshops, we offer social capacity building workshops. And what I mean by that is if someone wants to write a grant to be able to get a mascot like Brocky, we'll help them do that and not only work with them on the grant application, but teach them how to write a grant by offering grant writing workshops. We've offered workshops on how to write letters to your council member. Our gardeners will go with us when we meet with our council district members so that they have the experience of engagement in the political process. So these are all things that we try to work on. Right now, we have a big policy push in the city of Buffalo to have the city create a new vacant lot reuse policy, and that is being done hand in hand with our block club leaders and our gardeners. One of the other things I think that's really important about the idea of empowerment is that we're teaching children to care for the environment. So as I said, we have about 30 school gardens in our network. So it's about a third of the gardens. And we're working with children from preschool all the way through high school. And the gardens for many kids are the only access to nature that they have. Many live in neighborhoods where the garden is the only green space in the neighborhood. And so whether that's the school garden or their neighborhood garden, we want them to feel at home there and as an extension of their school home and their community home. So each garden that's in our network is designed by and determined how it's managed by the community. Grassroots is really here only to provide that advocacy and support. We leave it up to the community to determine what each garden looks like and how best to grow. We just ask that they follow a few safe growing guidelines with us. This is our garden at the Moot Senior Center in the Fruit Belt. And these are all seniors from the neighborhood that came together to build a garden. We're also talking about transformation at a larger level. And so this is another garden that I know Marianne is very familiar with because it's also in the Riverside neighborhood. This was a vacant lot that was completely transformed in just 2 summers from left to right here and has really become a home to the children in the neighborhood. This is our Mayor Avenue Community Garden, and it's probably the Black Rock Riverside Gardens, one of the things I love about them is that they engage youth. Some of our gardens, we have to remind folks that, they shouldn't be shooing the kids out, that they're great at bringing children in. And this garden was built around the vision of the children in the neighborhood that needed a safe place to play. This is Elias down here doing some daytime moon gazing. So when we're talking about the overall system, we're talking about transforming community. One of the ways that Grassroots does that is our citywide policy changes. So we were part of the revisions of the Buffalo Green Code. Right now we're working on this big vacant lot reuse policy where we're bringing together affordable housing developers, green groups like Grassroots, and then our block club and civic organizations to all talk together and draft some policy recommendations to the city about how they could be working better to provide access to that land. We also created a land trust in 2017 as we started to see more gentrification happening in certain neighborhoods. And we know that the land is kind of being gobbled up in some neighborhoods by outside investors. For the first time, some of our gardens came up for sale. People tried to buy them out from underneath the community because there is no long-term protection of the gardens that are on leased land. The city did not put any deed restrictions on them or conservation easements. And so we created the land trust as a way to counter that. And to date, we've only had 2 gardens be privately donated to us, and we've been working with the city continuously for several years now to try to find a disposition that would satisfy them and satisfy us to have about 15 other lots come into the land trust. So we are working on that actively. That's been a main focus of mine for the last 2 years. As I mentioned, all of our decision making happens at the committee level. So our community is invested in all the decisions that we're making. We offer those social capacity building workshops. We are focused heavily right now on accepting new gardens in neighborhoods where there's food apartheid. And we use that term very directly to talk about neighborhoods where people cannot access food, not by their choice, but by design of the neighborhood. That there has been disinvestment of grocery stores and businesses. There has been redlining. There has been systemic racism that has kept people from having access to food. And so where we've been growing most heavily the last 5 years is on the east side of Buffalo. We now have 50% of our gardens on the east side of Buffalo, and we've relocated our headquarters, our Community Garden Resource Center, to the east side to have more presence there and to really work on how do we ensure people that otherwise are denied access to food have these gardens to grow food, but also have other access like the potential for urban farms and how to do that in their neighborhoods. So we're connecting neighborhoods to service needs. I just want to wrap up real quick by talking about 2 other initiatives we have. We've started a therapeutic gardening initiative. When I came to Grassroots, I had a very different background. I was a researcher interested in how do communities use gardening to heal. And we started a program after I got here because this was already happening in our gardens. Many of our gardens were started after community violence. There had been a shooting on one street, and a young person, a 17-year-old, died in the arms of one of the block club leaders. And she vowed that, you know, it sounds like a movie story. She vowed that she was never going to allow that to happen again. And so they took that lot where the gang violence was happening and they turned it into the Cambridge Avenue Community Garden. The neighbors came out of their houses when they felt safe because the garden was there. The drug dealers went away because someone was always in the garden watching. And so these are the ways in which we're creating community change. And we knew it wasn't enough just to have those physical spaces, but that we wanted to do something to provide resources to the community. Our community grief center is located in the suburbs in Cheektowaga. There is no service providing grief counseling in the city of Buffalo. So we partnered with them to say, we have access to all of this land in the city. We're in every neighborhood. Let's bring your services into the city and provide workshops together. So we started a program called They That Sow in Tears. That's a gardening workshop that's co-facilitated by myself, by Geraldine Wilson, who I told you about in the beginning, because Geraldine started her garden after her brother was murdered, and her garden became a place for her to pour her grief. And so as someone with lived experience and expertise in homicide, Geraldine joins us as a facilitator. And then Abby Unger, who is the director of psychosocial services at our local grief center and hospice, comes in. And it's a chance for people to meet a grief counselor in a safe place in their own neighborhood in a way that maybe they would never have picked up the phone to call the counseling center. So we do that as well. We started this year 3 therapeutic community-led gardens in residential facilities. We're bringing the community garden into a domestic violence shelter, into our Erie County Youth Detention Center, and into a foster care residential program for young and pregnant parenting youth. So all of that, again, is led by our community-led mental health task force that keeps us accountable for making sure we're meeting community needs. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so I'm going to stop after this. But our last initiative I wanted to mention was Gardening for All. This is the project that Geraldine and I started. We want to go beyond ADA compliance to make sure that our community gardens are accessible to all people. These are some volunteers here from Frontier High School out in the suburbs that came in to help us install our Moon Arch, which is our welcoming and wheelchair accessible entry into the Broadway community garden. This year, we're going to be laying accessible pathways. We were actually supposed to go out yesterday and start doing that, but the rain prevented us from doing that. So we're really wanting to make sure that all gardens can be accessed by every person. And again, in addition, we're going beyond that to offer those trainings. So we partnered last year with Deaf Access Services to offer training on deaf cultural competency. You know, it's been a struggle for our gardeners that are deaf to connect to the other gardeners because of communication needs. So one of the things Grassroots has committed to is paying for the cost of interpreters at all of our meetings so that every gardener that comes to a meeting can feel heard and can have a voice with us. Finally, Freedom Gardens. I'm just going to quickly touch on this one. This started as a response to the pandemic. That was one of those emerging community needs I talked about. Gail Wells, pictured here on the left, is one of our longtime gardeners at the Jesse Clipper Park Garden. And Gail was very concerned about the high rates of coronavirus, particularly in some of our Black neighborhoods in Buffalo, in zip codes where we had high rates of poverty already. And so Gail started a program to bring home gardens to people free of charge. We put out an application. We had funding to do 50 gardens. In 6 days, we received 384 applications. And so Gail quickly grew a team of people to go out to people's houses at the height of the pandemic last spring and build them gardens right on their property. Or if they were a renter, we gave them an intensive earth box growing system to have at home. And this is a project we're happy to continue this year. This is Gail out working with some of the gardeners, Freedom Gardens, many people that, again, couldn't access growing food because they didn't have the resources, those materials at their disposal financially. And so we provided that. And now we have, this year, we're expecting 100 Freedom Gardeners in network. This is a project led by the Black community that Grassroots Gardens is happy to act as a fiscal agent and sponsor for. So I'm going to open it up to questions and invite Marianne to come back on screen with me. We're happy to take your questions now. And you can find us, if you want to follow along, at Grassroots Gardens on Facebook and at GGWNY on Twitter and Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jeanette and Marianne, for this wonderful presentation. Lily and I were just talking about how we've learned so much just in the last hour about community gardening and the impact. So we have a few questions here that we'll share from attendees. The first, I think you did address it about owning. Do you own the lots that the gardens are on? And you did cover that.
Yeah, so we only own 2 right now, but we are trying actively to bring more into the land trust. I think we are going to be successful in bringing our first publicly owned city lot, the Putnam Community Garden, into the Grassroots Garden Network this year. And as I said, we've got a big push to the city to try to make some kind of agreement about how the land will transfer to us. City of Buffalo would like us to pay for that land. We've all agreed we're not paying market value for gardens we've been caring for, in some cases for 28 years now. And so, you know, including the Black Rock Riverside Gardens that Marianne and company are stewarding. And so this is a part of our long-term goal, is how do we protect the land that the community has been caring for and have our city government partners recognize that that land needs to stay with the community and under their control.
Absolutely. Great. All right. Another question here is, do you have garden composting?
Yeah, Marianne, do you want to talk about any efforts you're doing in your gardens? Or
We have a variety of situations. We, in some gardens, we do composting. We always bring compost into our gardens, whether we compost on site or not. And in some instances, because the neighbors really objected to having compost piles, we've tried to educate people, but there comes a point where you have to make a decision whether the battle is worth fighting over compost or the battle is worth fighting over the garden. So we have both situations.
And we'll see that, you know, differently in other gardens. Some have large and very productive on-site composting, and some are just, we're bringing in compost every season from our vendor that we use to provide that. So we work with the City of Buffalo. I think our headquarters is eventually going to become one of the scrap it sites the city has for food waste recycling. We were going to do that last year, but because of the pandemic and being mostly remote last season to keep all of our staff safe, we have not done that yet, but we're heading in that direction.
I know you did mention fruit trees and shrubs, but this question is from Joanne. She asks, do you include fruit trees and shrubs in your gardens? Is it, it would be a long-term investment, and is it practical for a community garden?
Yes, 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 yes.
You know.
You know, we found it kind of necessary. I mean, people will relate to apple trees. People relate to cherry trees. I mean, and if you can't use them as a food source necessarily, use them as a teaching venue. So they are, practicality is, if people, in my mind, if people come and take the fruit and eat it, it's very practical. And long-term, it becomes long-term. I didn't come in here thinking I was going to be involved in a garden for 10 years. It just happens. So, you know, I wouldn't worry about that as much as, you know, again, what do you think the community will respond to, and what do you think the community needs?
And Grassroots has moved to a policy over the last few years where we only really offer in terms of the free plant material we offer, native perennials, because we want to build that urban habitat in that corridor. You know, one of the great projects that Black Rock Riverside Alliance has taken on is the certification of Buffalo as a certified wildlife habitat city, and our community gardens played a role in that. And so we want to encourage that pollination, the pollinator buffets. We just put one in along our garden next to our office at Broadway last season, and in one season it's been amazing to see the transformation. And most of that is donated materials. We have nursery partners that will call us. We get partners, landscape partners will say, hey, I'm taking out 50 shrubs. Some of those are native. Do you want them? And they'll just drop them off, and then we figure out how to move them. So that's a large part of what our staff does, is they help facilitate that coordination of donated material to the different gardens.
Awesome. Another question that we have here, let me look here. Do you experience any vandalism or damage to the community gardens?
I would say it's rare. There have been cases, and we see it more specifically. Usually it's a neighbor issue than a neighborhood issue. So sometimes there can be conflict between a neighbor and the garden, and it's almost always an issue that's already long-standing in the community between those neighbors. So there is a surprising part of my job in doing conflict resolution. I was not expecting when I came in, but the gardens, right, are kind of just another place where the community experiences each other, and that includes conflict. So sometimes we do deal with conflict, but not so much vandalism. We have a different model than like you might see in New York City, where there's block community gardens. We have a policy that all community gardens need to be open to the public. They may have a gate or a living fence or even a small barrier fence if they've had vandalism, but they cannot be locked. They have to remain open to the public. And we feel pretty strongly about that as an organization, that you can't keep people out. And I know Mary Ann agrees with me on this, because this has been a long discussion we've been having.
But there's a real key issue here. We have closed one garden, and it's very interesting where gardens are located. I think if the community itself comes to Grassroots Gardens, which has happened in a number of instances, and says, we want to start a community garden, they have a reason and a purpose for doing it. And if the community embraces and almost protects that garden, it's not going to be vandalized. And I mean community, I mean the bigger community, not just the volunteers. We did have a situation where someone thought a garden should be placed in a particular location. It was not a good location. It was not embraced by anyone. No one really surrounded it and took care of it. In fact, it was part of a cut through. I mean, people would just use it as kind of one way to get from one place to another. And that traffic within the garden itself kind of destroyed that garden. It wasn't anybody's space. It was just a mechanism to get from one place to another. And that was really, I mean, we just said no. There was just too much, I don't want to say, it was disenfranchisement almost. They didn't care about it as a garden, so there's no point in continuing to try and make it that. That was what kind of allowed us to open up the Mare Street garden, because we moved the resources from one to another, and that garden is now totally embraced by the community. So it's a real good example of, if one location fails, don't necessarily give up. You just may need to have it in a different space. Absolutely. But also don't try and beat it to death that you're going to make it work. It may just not work there.
That's a great point. Okay, we have just a couple more questions here. You did touch on this briefly about pollinators, but is there habitat that we can make for butterflies and bees in our own yard? But I would also be curious about the community gardens as well.
I'll defer that one to Mary Ann.
Yes, yes, and yes. I will post as maybe part of this. We are working on a habitat project. National Wildlife Federation does garden habitats. We are a big part of doing Erie and Niagara County, so I will make sure we post those resources or get them to you so that you can expand it. We haven't quite gotten to your county yet, but we may get there soon.
Awesome, great. And so that question was from Peyton, who's age 9. So thank you, Peyton, for joining us today.
Perfect time to do it, Peyton.
Yes. They also have another question. This is our last question we have here. is there a way that we can help make a community garden here in Jamestown?
That might be a better question for you, Lenny. I would encourage everyone to think about where they can have a community garden together and what do those community gardens look like and what is the purpose it's serving. Like Mary Ann said, it's really about what the community wants, and then you just find the right location, right? So I would turn that back over to a discussion to you all.
Wonderful. Yes. So I will say that in addition to taking over the Grow Fair, the Jamestown Public Market umbrella is also now managing our community gardens. There's 3 actually, located along Lakeview and 6th, and then 2 located along Washington, kind of kitty corner to the library and the park. And so we're super excited to continue the community garden program, which has been a wonderful community program run through the JRC previously. And we have plots still available for rent. Individuals and community groups can rent the plots. They're 12 by 4 and utilize them for this season. And we have a few community groups that we're super excited about working with, including the Jamestown Justice Coalition and Aspire. And so our goal is to really continue to build our community food system and just really live community. And so I thank you, Marianne and Jeanette, for doing this wonderful presentation today and really giving us some things to think about as a city. What can we achieve together? And
Can I make one real quick comment? Anybody who is looking to start a garden, I would really strongly suggest that you volunteer if there are community gardens there, because you're going to get an instant education on what and why things exist. And once you do that, you'll be a much stronger advocate if you want to put one truly within your community. And I think Jeanette and I have learned that that's the easiest way to get people some experience and to see whether they really want to start a community garden or they're just looking for a volunteer activity. Those are very different things.
Yeah, I was just going to plug too, you can look on our website at grassrootsgardens.org. I just put it in the chat. If you click under more resources, we have tons and tons of resources about what you need. The raised beds, the lumber, all those things, how to build a raised bed, how to get your water sources, everything you need to know about starting a community garden you can find on our website too.
Thank you. And I will just end it here. Volunteer opportunities on April 17th, which is a Saturday. We are having a community work day at both gardens. So you can find that information on our Facebook page. And we welcome anyone and everyone from Jamestown in the community to just come and check out the gardens, see what we're doing, and see if it's something that you would be interested in helping out or maybe expanding in the community. So great. Well, thank you once again, Jeanette and Marianne. We are so thrilled to host you this morning. And everyone, please check out Grassroots Gardens. And I hope that you ladies have a wonderful gardening season this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Take care.
All right. So thank you very much for everyone in attendance today. We are going to welcome shortly Adrian Ploss from Hickory Hearst Farms, who is going to be presenting Growing and Sowing, which will be information, sharing her expertise and knowledge on seed starting, amongst other things. But we are going to take